What if the first cryptocurrency had launched in 1995? Before Bitcoin, before Ethereum, before any of it. There was a moment when digital money almost went mainstream. Not as some underground experiment, but built directly into one of the most iconic operating systems in history, Windows 95. Back then, Microsoft was working on a revolutionary new idea, a kind of internet cash. And at the center of that dream was a man named David Chaum, a cryptographer, a privacy advocate, and the creator of Digicash, possibly the first real attempt at anonymous digital currency. A young Bill Gates wanted to partner with him. He wanted Digicash to power the future of finance, right from your PC. But something went wrong. The deal fell apart. And the future of money took a very different path. Welcome to the Crypto Historian. This is the story of the cryptocurrency that almost launched in Windows 95, and how that one decision may have made Bitcoin irrelevant more than a decade before its inception. To understand just how big this moment could have been, we need to rewind to 1995. Windows 95 wasn't just a software launch, it was, honestly, a cultural event. On release day, people lined up outside electronics stores. There were TV ads, celebrity endorsements, even Jay Leno cracking jokes on stage with Bill Gates. Microsoft had poured over $300 million into promoting the operating system. And, yeah, it worked. By the end of its first year, Windows 95 was installed on over 40 million computers worldwide. This wasn't just the most popular OS in the world. It was the digital gateway for a generation. If you were online in the 90s, you were probably doing it through Windows 95. Behind the scenes, Microsoft was already thinking about how to reshape money for the digital age. Bill Gates was famously bullish on the idea of electronic payments. In a 1996 interview, he predicted a future where people would no longer carry cash. They'd send money digitally from their computers. He wasn't wrong. What Gates envisioned wasn't that different from what we use today. Online banking, mobile wallets, peer-to-peer apps. But you know, he wanted to build it early, and he wanted it to run inside Windows itself. Microsoft began quietly exploring partnerships with tech startups that could help them create a seamless digital payments platform. But this wasn't just about adding a shopping cart button or doing bank transfers. No, the real goal was to create something more ambitious, a native digital currency. Think about that for a second. In the mid-90s, before most people had even sent an email, Microsoft wanted to let users send money digitally, directly from their desktop. No plastic cards, no cash, no bank tellers, just a few clicks, and your payment was sent across the internet. And that's where Digicash comes in. Microsoft believed it had found the perfect partner, a company with the tech, the vision, and the cryptographic credentials to make this future possible. But as we'll see, visionary technology isn't always enough. Before Satoshi Nakamoto, before Vitalik Buterin, there was David Chaum, a name most people today have never heard, but one that belongs in the Crypto Hall of Fame. In the 1980s, Chaum was a mathematician and cryptographer working on one of the most misunderstood challenges of the digital world, privacy. He believed that as more of our lives moved online, the power to track, monitor, and surveil individuals would grow, unless something was done about it. And so, in 1983, Chaum published a revolutionary paper, Blind Signatures for Untraceable Payments. This was the foundation for what would later become Digicash, and arguably for modern cryptocurrency. So what was Digicash? In simple terms, it was a form of digital money, but unlike online bank transfers, Digicash was anonymous, untraceable, and based on cutting-edge cryptography. Chaum's system allowed people to make electronic payments without revealing their identity, a radical idea in a world where financial institutions are built on trust, identity, and oversight. Here's how it worked. Users would withdraw digital coins from the bank, just like they'd withdraw cash from an ATM. But instead of physical bills, they'd receive cryptographically signed tokens on their computer. These tokens could then be sent to merchants. And because they used blind signatures, the bank could verify that the tokens were real without knowing where they came from or who was using them. In other words, it was cash, but for the internet. No tracking, no surveillance, no credit card companies collecting data. For Chaum, this wasn't just a technical challenge, it was a mission. He saw privacy as a human right, and he viewed Digicash as a way to preserve that right in the digital age. Like many visionaries, he was early, maybe too early. In 1989, Chaum officially launched Digicash in Amsterdam. The tech was real, the code worked, the product was built. But there was a problem. No one really understood what it was for. Banks were cautious, regulators were confused, and the average person, they were still trying to figure out dial-up internet and how to open a web browser. Not worry about untraceable digital money. Still, Chaum was persistent. He began looking for major partners who could take Digicash mainstream, give it reach, give it scale, give it relevance. That's when Microsoft called. And for a moment it looked like everything was about to change. By 1994, Microsoft had a vision. They didn't just want Windows to run your programs, they wanted it to run your life. Communication, media, money. And Digicash? It looked like the perfect piece of that puzzle. According to insiders, Microsoft approached Digicash with a serious offer, a chance to integrate its digital payment system directly into Windows 95. If the deal went through, Digicash would become the default payment layer for the internet, built into the operating system, accessible to millions, a digital wallet on every desktop. Think about that. A cryptocurrency-like system, anonymous, decentralized payments, running by default on the world's most popular software. It would have leapfrogged banks. It would have beaten PayPal. It might have prevented Bitcoin from ever needing to exist. But the deal fell apart, and the reason why depends on who you ask. Some say Chaum didn't trust Microsoft. He feared that if Digicash became too corporate, too centralized, it would lose the privacy-preserving features that made it revolutionary. Microsoft, on the other hand, had their own concerns. Digicash's tech was brilliant, but its structure wasn't exactly scalable. The company was small, the leadership unclear, and the product, while elegant, wasn't built for mass-market user experience. There were questions about compliance, too. Governments were already whispering about money laundering risks. Untraceable payments sounded cool until regulators got involved. Ultimately, it came down to money. Gates offered a straight $100 million to buy Digicash. Chaum wanted to hold on to his interest and countered with $2 per each copy of Windows sold. Neither man would budge. So the talks stalled. Microsoft grew cautious, and in the end, they walked away. Windows 95 launched that August with incredible fanfare, but no digital cash system. The world moved on. And Digicash, it stayed small, still powerful, still visionary, but now isolated and increasingly irrelevant. This was a fork in history, a decision point. If David Chaum had said yes, if Microsoft had pushed harder, if timing, politics, and personalities had aligned, Digicash could have become the world's first mainstream digital currency, private, decentralized, built into the digital DNA of the internet. But instead, it became a footnote, a whisper in the background, of a much louder revolution that was still a decade away. After Microsoft walked away, Digicash was left alone. The partnership had been Chaum's best shot at mainstream adoption, but now, without distribution, without brand power, and without a massive install base, Digicash struggled to survive. On paper, it had everything: advanced cryptography, a working protocol, a visionary founder. But none of that was enough, because Digicash faced a wall of challenges that even brilliant math couldn't solve. First, the world just wasn't ready. In the late 90s, most people were still getting used to the idea of the internet. Online shopping was new. Downloading software felt risky. The idea of trusting your money to some invisible tokens on a floppy disk, for most users, terrifying. There was no smartphone, no two-factor authentication, no Coinbase. Second, there was no ecosystem. Merchants didn't know how to integrate it. Banks were skeptical or outright opposed, and governments, they saw it as a threat. Anonymity, untraceable money? That sounded less like innovation and more like a money laundering machine. Digicash tried to pivot. They offered licenses to banks in Europe. They even struck a small deal with Deutsche Bank. But it wasn't enough. The company was bleeding money. It had limited staff, declining morale, and a product ahead of its time in all the wrong ways. In 1998, after nearly a decade of work, Digicash filed for bankruptcy. The dream, Chaum's dream, was over. Most people didn't even notice. The media barely covered it. There were no headlines about the death of the internet's first cash. But in the background, something had shifted. Digicash had proved a few things: that digital money was technically possible, that privacy-focused systems could work, but governments wouldn't like them, and that without decentralization, even the best code can fail. Chaum would later reflect on it like this: the failure of Digicash wasn't technical, it was about timing, culture, and adoption. And in hindsight, he was right. Digicash wasn't a bad idea, it was a brilliant one, just one that came too early and too alone. Digicash died quietly. No headlines, no tribute, just another dot-com collapse in an era full of them. But its legacy never really disappeared. In fact, if you read the Bitcoin white paper, if you study how Satoshi Nakamoto built his system, you'll find Chaum's fingerprints all over it. Blind signatures, privacy-enhancing cryptography, the idea of money without intermediaries. These weren't new ideas in 2008. They were seeds Chaum had already planted in the 80s. And that's what makes this story so important. Because the history of cryptocurrency isn't just about wild price swings or meme coins or overnight millionaires. It's about the long, difficult, and often invisible road to one simple but radical idea: that money, like speech, like code, like thought, should be free. Not free as in cost nothing, but free as in permissionless, free from surveillance, free from censorship, free from middlemen who get to say yes or no. That's what Chaum was trying to build. He just didn't have the right moment, or the right infrastructure, or maybe the right internet. So what did the world do after Digicash? It moved on, toward more centralized systems, toward easier tools but less freedom. Until a few years later, a group of young tech entrepreneurs had an idea. They weren't cryptographers, they weren't privacy activists, they were building a payments app. And in its earliest days, PayPal wasn't just trying to make money easier, it was trying to make money itself. In our next episode, we'll explore how Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and the PayPal mafia came this close to inventing Bitcoin, and why, in the end, they gave it all up. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button and subscribe, because there's a lot more crypto history still buried in the archives. Drop a comment. Would you have used Digicash in 1995, and do you think Bitcoin still would have happened if Chaum had said yes? You've been watching The Crypto Historian, where the past is encrypted and the truth is worth mining.